Hey everybody, welcome to my review for Raid and Trade. This is the fourth and final video in a series of videos for Raid and Trade. If you want to learn a little bit more about the game or get taught how to play the game or just see some sample gameplay video, check out my other three videos in the series. In this video, I'm just going to give you my final opinions on the game itself. Now, Raid and Trade is a thematic game, or as I like to call them, an Ameri-theme game, because I can't stand the term Ameritrash or Ameritrash or Thrash or whatever the heck the term is these days, because it doesn't really cover what these games are. These basically are games that bring theme to the forefront and sometimes put mechanics to the wayside, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But if you really enjoy your thematic games, you really just don't care because you want the game to match the theme. And if it matches the theme, you can look past some minor mechanical negatives and enjoy what could be considered a really fantastic thematic game. Now, Raid and Trade, in my mind, is pretty much Fallout the board game. This is basically a futuristic post-apocalyptic game without the hordes of thousands of zombies trying to tear you down, which seems to be the only thing that they do for post-apocalyptic these days. So it's really darn cool to see a board game that's post-apocalyptic, minus the zombies. Now, I'm saying this without mentioning the expansion, which is probably going to be going up on Kickstarter probably around the time you're seeing the video. And I know a little bit about the Kickstarter for the expansion, so I'll talk about it a little bit towards the end of the video, but since I haven't played it, I'm not going to mention anything beyond what it adds to mechanic-wise. So I'll just toss that in at the end of the video here before I close out. But so far in the basic game, this is pretty much thematically just like The Walking Dead. It's not about anything except the survivors, their story to survive, their quest to try to gain access into the Golden City, and survive this post-apocalyptic wasteland where death and desolation is pretty much a way of life. And you basically have to scavenge every single day just to survive. Now, in Raid and Trade, the players are playing competitively, and this is an extremely competitive game where all the players are working against each other. Now, there are some scenarios that come with the game, and again, not to jump ahead of myself here, the future expansion that's coming out that, again, should be on Kickstarter. I'll put a link in here in the show notes towards the end here. But if you go ahead and check out the Kickstarter for the expansion, you're going to see that they're adding things like making the game a cooperative game and adding more scenarios, and they're also changing up the gameplay to make it a little bit more thematic too, in that they're making it, I guess thematic's a bad term, they're making it more of a competitive game where combat becomes much more deadly and players are more and more dice and sending more people against each other. But again, I'm starting to segue again, and I don't want to do that here because I just want to talk about Raid and Trade. So, Raid and Trade is, like I've said, a thematic game, and there's lots of thematic mechanics thrown in this game that I found really, really awesome, things I really enjoyed about this game. But as a board game reviewer, and as somebody who enjoys thematic games, and, well, you can see my darn coffee cup that I have pretty much whenever I do a review here. It says, Eat, Sleep, and German board games. So I'll let you know I do enjoy my Euro games, and you can look behind me, see a third of my collection, and you don't see the wall behind the camera that has about 200 more board games. If you saw my collection, you pretty much see that I enjoy a lot of the Euro games. I enjoy a lot of thematic games. So I really enjoy a wide variety of games, just as long as they're games that have a lot of competition, allow players to interact with each other, and allow players to directly or indirectly interfere with each other. Those are the kind of games I really, really enjoy. And the kind of games that I don't really enjoy, or the games that I'm really not a huge fan, are the games I like to describe as the multiplayer solitaire. So games such as Dominion, games where players are basically racing each other, and I'm talking basic Dominion because I know there's a lot of fans of Dominion who are going to jump into the comments down below and defend Dominion. But just understand I'm talking about the very basic game of Dominion where there's very little player interaction and it's lots of multiplayer solitaire. Those are the kind of games I don't enjoy, and that is the kind of game that this game is definitely not. This is a very, very competitive game where all the players are playing very competitively. They're out to get each other, and this is one of those games where it's very possible for players to pretty much screw over other players directly, come after them, take away their resources, attack other players, ruin the other players' plans, make other players' lives absolutely miserable because the game allows you to do that. It's allowed in the rules, and that's something that I know not every single board game player enjoys. Before we go anywhere with this review, there's a few things that I just want to get out in the open, because if these are things you can't accept, you might as well stop watching this video review right now and not even bother buying this game, because these are the things that are not going to go away, and these are things that are not going to change your opinion about this game. This is wholeheartedly a thematic game. Yes, there are some Euro mechanics. You have the fact that you're going out there trying to get resources. You need to get the buildings. You need to go out there and get the resources so you can build things. These things you're going to build to help you win the game. It's got the Euro mechanics, such as you have a limited amount of actions. You have your action dial. It's going to give you a certain amount of action points that you can use to go around the board, move around the board, interact, get resources, raid buildings, and do things like that. But this also has them thematic things that you don't find a lot of Euro games, is the fact that you can attack other players very, very directly, and there's nothing in this game stopping players from dogpiling on each other. Literally nothing. If you're one of those players who hates to feel like you're picked on because multiple people are coming after you because you happen to have all the resources that everybody wants, and you're painting a big target on your head by the fact that you're 2 quests into the game already, which means you're ahead of all the other players, which means you're closer to winning. Guess what? You have a big target on your head, and there's nothing in the rules of this game stopping players from dogpiling on you. There's nothing stopping players from coming after you just because you have one resource they want. There is nothing in this game stopping players from playing nice with each other. And I know this is something that's very, very common in a lot of the Euro games. A lot of the Euro games have catch-up mechanics. A lot of the games have things that prevent players from directly interacting with each other. Heck, there's another game that's extremely popular right now that just popped up on Kickstarter that's already funded well over $1 million. That is actually has built-in mechanics, literally built in the game, that prevents players, and this is a game that's semi-dubbed, a semi-war game, semi-a 4X game, but it literally has mechanics built into it that absolutely prevents players from directly attacking the other players in the beginning of the game. There's nothing like that in this game, and that is something I know 100% your average Euro gamer cannot stand, and that is something that Raid and Trade has. This is a thematic game. This is a Mera theme game. This is America theme or a Mera theme game mixed with a Euro game, but it definitely is not afraid to show its Mera theme roots. It's not afraid to let you dogpile on other players. It's not afraid to let you attack other players. It's not afraid to let you tear down other players. And it's not afraid to admit that there may be a little bit of luck that come into play, whether it's the luck of getting the resources you need, whether it's the luck of getting the right raid cards, or whether it's just the luck of just happening to be in the right place at the right time, manage to play smarter than the other players, staying away from the other players who happen to have blood on the mind and want to tear each other down, or you're simply going out there and playing smart and playing quietly and going out and getting all those resources and playing nice, hiding from the other players, and then just to suddenly reveal that, guess what, I've won the game. Because that's one other thing about Raid and Trade. This is one of those games where you'll all will be playing, and then suddenly you're going to look across the table and notice that one player is pretty much one round away from winning the game. And the only thing you can do to stop them is to race all the way over there, hope you can dogpile on them, take away all the resources and stop them from winning. Otherwise, they're going to win the game. Now that we got all that out of the way, now we can discuss about what makes Raid and Trade a really great thematic game. This is a great thematic game along the lines of what you'd see with the Flying Frog protections, or even a classic fantasy flight game such as Arkham Horror, or games along those lines where you're playing the theme of the game and the game drags you into the theme and you tell stories after you get done playing the game. This is one of those games that after you get done playing, weeks later you start telling a story about the time that one thing happened where everybody was playing the game and something came up and everybody was having a heck of a lot of fun, because this game drags you and pulls you into the story, because the theme is definitely really highly present in this game. Now, I couldn't get into this when I did the full playthrough of the game, because when I did the playthrough, I was just trying to show you the mechanics of the game and show you how the game plays. But this game is dripping with theme. There is a lot of theme in the game. Whether you're just looking at the building cards, every single one of these building cards, when you raid them, they all have some text on them on the bottom, which is very thematic, fits the theme of the game, and actually even fits the theme of the rewards when you actually look at the cards. There's a lot of theme on there. There is a lot of theme on these event cards. Every one of these event cards, they all have text on them. They all match the artwork. They all describe exactly what's going on and fit the theme of the game extremely well. The game is done fantastically thematically, and it really tells a story. The game makes you feel like you're playing a story of some characters who are literally just fighting each other tooth and nail, because they know that only one of them can get into this futuristic city, which is the last bastion of humanity, so they can escape these wastelands and get away from the dregs of this futuristic ruined society, because all they want to do is be happy. I hate to use the reference, but it's a show I've been enjoying, so I'll just use the reference of The Walking Dead. If you ever watched The Walking Dead on AMC, you understand pretty much the feeling this game is giving you. In the show The Walking Dead, they're trying to survive a post-apocalyptic future, and there's been a few times where they found a little bit of a settlement. And, oh, well, I'm going to give you spoilers here. In the current season, they found a settlement that they're trying to save because they're trying to avoid the bleak future, but all the world around them is pretty much destroyed. And they found this little city that they're trying to survive in, and this is basically the theme that this game creates. You have this horrible, horrible wasteland all of our players are trying to escape from. Unfortunately, only one player can escape from this horrible wasteland, so they're trying to fight to gain access to the Golden City. And that theme truly comes through with this game. Now, ignoring the theme, this game has got a lot of really cool things going for it. You have 5 different characters that all play differently. Now, you have your typical player board, which may not make it seem like these players play differently, but every one of these players has different combat abilities thanks to the fact that every single player has their own special combat die that has one unique result that's unique to every one of these heroes. This board has a completely different layout, whether you want to play with the wasteland side, which is going to play differently than the standard side, because there's different rules from the way the buildings lay out. And even just talking about the buildings, every time you play the game, these buildings are going to be laid out completely different every time you play the game. You're going to be encountering the buildings in a completely different way every time you encounter the game. Sometimes you're going to get an early start and decide that you're going to get a lot of cards that are going to decide to help you decide that maybe you're going to try to play this game and try to be one of the good guys, and showing that the best way to gain access to the Golden City is to be a good guy and try to get all the way up to 10 with your faction. Or sometimes you may play the game and you're going to get some of the cards that are going to give you tons of resources, and you're going to use those resources to go start buying all of your special abilities, your special creations that you're going to build. They're going to raise up your skill points that allow you to go for the skill point victory, because that's what you want to go for, because that's another way to win the game. Or maybe you're going to play the game and you're going to get a whole bunch of encounters, or the global event cards are going to come up in a special way that's going to make you realize that probably the best way to try to win the game is try to be the first person to complete 3 quests. So the game is just really awesome with the amount of replay. There's multiple victory conditions. There's multiple ways to play the game, because these maps are going to play out differently every time you play the game, because you can basically build the board any way you want to every time you play the game. And there's even rules for you to make special maps. If you just want to do weird shaped maps where you have strange shapes like that, you can do that. That's actually allowed in the rules. And there's multiple different difficulties, because you have the black market where you can change the difficulty of the game and the way you're doing trading with the resources. The way these quests are going to come out is going to make you play differently, because sometimes the quests are going to come out that aren't really going to matter with your faction also. You're not going to care about your faction. You're just going to go gung-ho, raid everything, burn everything to the ground in an effort to gain access to Golden City. And then sometimes the quests are going to come out, they're going to force you to try to gain a lot of faction, changing just the way you have to play the game. So there is a lot of replay in the game, not even to mention the complete alternate scenario that comes in the game, where players are semi-cooperating because they have to defeat a whole bunch of guards that are protecting the helicopter, but they're also kind of working against each other, because it's a 4 or 5 player scenario, but only 3 players can make it on the helicopter. So in the beginning, they may work together a little bit, but by the end they're fighting tooth and nail to survive, again, because it's the post-apocalypse, and to the victor go the spoils. So you have some fantastic replay with the different scenarios, the different maps, the different way each one of these players plays out, because every one of these heroes is asymmetrical. They have their own special abilities, their own theme, their own way to play. There's different way that everything's going to come out. There's just so much replay in this box, mixed in with so much theme, mixed in just with so much that drags you into this post-apocalyptic game. And again, I can't mention this enough, it's a post-apocalyptic game where we're not fighting zombies, which seems to be every darn post-apocalyptic game on the market these days. And it's just awesome to play a game without zombies. Now, I know I said earlier in the video that this game does allow a lot of combat and a lot of dogpiling and a lot of gang up on the leader things, issues in it. But I also want to let you know it's not mandatory. But I did want to throw that in there because it is possible If you have 1 or 2 players in a group who are extremely cutthroat, and you have 1 or 2 players in the group who are not cutthroat, those cutthroat players are going to prey on the non-cutthroat players, just like jackals are going to feed on a corpse. So I just want to give you the point that that is a possibility way to play, but this is kind of a sandbox game. It is actually possible to go through an entire game, and I know people who actually enjoy playing this game where there's probably maybe 1 or 2 rolls of the combat dice. And then, of course, there's game groups like my game group where there's probably about 30 or 40 rolls of the combat dice. But, you know, sometimes we're bloodthirsty like that. But the cool thing about this game is that's kind of what's really nice, that I can say this is a game that you can play multiple different ways, enjoy it multiple different ways. And this is one of those games that can probably be enjoyed by a lot of different play groups as long as you enjoy a thematic game that has a little bit of luck, a little bit of randomness, and sometimes things may not go in your favor just due to the luck and the randomness, but just understand that that's just the way it happens sometimes, and then just realize that just change up your strategy, because you know what? This is also one of those games where you can change up your strategy because there's multiple paths to victory. There's different ways to play the game. There's different ways to win the game. Now, I will say one thing before I close this out, though, that the game, even though it does play from 3 to 5 players, it does play differently at those different player counts. Now, I know I said, not to harp on the topic all over again, that this game can be pretty darn bloodthirsty if you want it to be, and it can also be pretty friendly if you want it to be, but that can also be really affected by the amount of players you have when you're playing the game. Because the board layout, even though the amount of buildings on the board is going to change depending on your amount of players, the size of the board really doesn't change based on the amount of players. So if you have a 3-player game, it's not that hard for the players to stay away from each other because you basically have 9 tiles for them to travel around. And it's really not that hard for players to stay away from each other because the buildings are kind of spread out a little bit more. And while the resources may be diminished, they're also spread out, so players have to kind of hunt further and wider to go after those resources. Whereas opposed if you decide to play this game as a 5-player game, the players have a tendency to get scrunched up a little bit more, and they have a tendency to look at each other's resources a little more, and they have a tendency to be tempted a little bit more to throw those combat dice just a little bit more. So I will say that while it is possible to have a less of a combative game and a little bit more of a combative game, it really is going to matter or really depend on the amount of players you have when you're playing the game. So while this game is enjoyable at 3 players, 4 players, and 5 players, just a little warning, it does seem to be a little bit more cutthroat and a little bit more bloodthirsty at the 5-player count. Now, before I wrap up here, there's one other really cool thing I do want to mention about the game, and it's not something I really discussed when I was describing the tutorial and the sample gameplay, because it's not something I wanted to cover because I didn't want to confuse things. But again, these tiles are double-sided, and there's the wasteland tiles, and then there's the ruined city tiles. Now, the cool thing about this game is that when you play with the wasteland tiles, it does diminish the luck, and it also does make the game kind of lean more towards its Euro mechanics, because the layout of the buildings on the wasteland tiles minimizes the luck because you're going to be rolling the dice a lot less for the buildings when you go out and raid them. When you play with the standard side, when you're playing the standard side for all these buildings, you're basically going to be rolling the dice for all of your red buildings, and you basically have a 50-50 shot of getting the good resources or the bad resources, and it can make a difference between 3 or 4 different resources, and that luck can really creep up, especially if you have a lot of bad luck with the dice. Now, the really cool thing is if you play with the wasteland side of the board, all the red buildings, and there's different amounts of these red buildings, are going to give you a standard set amount of rewards that's not going to be based on the roll of the dice. And that actually, believe it or not, minimizes the luck, minimizes the randomness, and also minimizes the combat between the players, because you're not going to have a player who is having terrible luck with the dice on their raids deciding that the only way they're going to get their resources is by using their combat die and start hunting other players who are having better luck. So, again, I didn't mention this in the playthrough, but it's something I definitely want to mention in the review. If you want more of the Ameritheme style game where you're going to have lots of combat, well, not lots, but a little bit more interaction, a lot more dogpiling, a lot more attacking, play the city side. But if you want more of a Euro game, a little bit less luck, a little bit less randomness, and a little bit less dogpiling, play the wasteland side. It does make a difference. Now, I do want to take a few moments just to talk about the expansion that, like I said, is probably on Kickstarter by the time you're watching this video. There's an expansion available for the game that's going to add more player interaction, It's going to basically add gangs to the game where the players are going to control gangs that they can send against the other players and allow those gangs to attack the other players. And it's going to make combat much more dominant in the game. But there's also other things it's adding. It's adding more boards, more things, and the boards themselves are actually much more interactive. Because right now, the only thing you have with the boards right now are these barriers, which are basically just, they're basically there just to slow you down and, you know, kind of use up your action points. But the boards in the expansion are actually much more interactive with, I think they're calling it Toxic Waste. Again, don't quote me. I haven't looked at the Kickstarter too well. I just have an email from Mage Company that describes it a little bit. And it's also including 4 more survivors who have some slightly different abilities, bringing the survivor count all the way up to 9. And there's also an expansion survivor. So, and that's the one who has the dynamite, bringing it up to a total player count of 10. And there's going to be more of these global events, more buildings, and more stuff, adding more to the variety of the game. So if you're interested in a raid and trade, definitely go check out the Kickstarter for the expansion. It actually allows you to buy the base game too, and you can even buy all these miniatures completely painted. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the YouTube comments down below. As always, you can always email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. As always, thanks for watching, and please subscribe. To survive this post-apocalyptic wasteland. And the worst thing about this post-apocalyptic wasteland is there's giant cats and nobody with a giant bow and arrow to hunt them named Eli with a book who's blind and fights like a super ninja and such a cool badass. But that movie was underrated. Besides, I want to hunt you down. You're too cool anyways.